Hello, and welcome to the final session of Techlandia Summit 21, Building an Expanded Equitable Digital Infrastructure. My name is Skip Newberry. I'm President and CEO of the Technology Association of Oregon, and I'll be your facilitator of this session along with Riley O'Brien, Vice President, Events and Experiences, who will be coordinating back-end support. We're excited to have you join us as our panel discusses the current challenges and the kinds of partnerships, programs, and tech infrastructure that will be needed to bridge the digital divide in Oregon and beyond going forward. A couple of participation guidelines before we start. All participants have been muted, so please remain on mute unless a TAO staff member unmutes you and calls on you to talk. You may ask or respond to questions in the chat box publicly or privately by directing your message to me or special events. We'll monitor the chat box and respond throughout the discussion. We'll also ask you all to engage via the participant icon on your screen. And we also encourage you to please engage with us on social media throughout the session and later today. We're going to make sure that this session is recorded and it'll be found on TAO's YouTube channel within 24 hours of the event. A huge thank you to all of the investors in the Techlandia Summit. We appreciate your support and we're excited to explore topics as we have done this week related to agriculture, healthcare, climate, environment, and of course, infrastructure. So a big thank you to Comcast Business, Fortinet, Grail, and SAP. And finally, it's my pleasure to introduce our panelists for this event. We have David Don, who's Vice President, Regulatory Policy at Comcast, Asha Desai, Corporate Vice President and 5G Executive Sponsor at Intel, Jonathan Neuen, Vice President, Global Field CISO Team at Fortinet, and Elizabeth Perez, Director, Office for Community Technology, City of Portland. So we're going to give each of the panelists some time to introduce themselves, talk a little bit about their respective roles and organizations, and then we'll get into some moderated Q&A. And to the extent possible, if folks have questions that come up during the session, feel free to throw those in chat, and we'll try and incorporate those in as we go. So just in no particular order here, other than Elizabeth is next to me on my screen. Elizabeth, why don't you start it off?
Sounds good. Thanks, Skip. So like Skip said, my name is Elizabeth Perez. I am the Director for the Office for Community Technology. We say OCT for short, government acronyms, with the City of Portland. So our mission with OCT is to make sure that Portlanders have barrier-free access to internet and related technology to live, productive, fulfilling lives. We put a particular emphasis on Black, Indigenous, and the Latinx community, people with disabilities, and older adults, because we know the data shows that they need that additional support. So when we're talking about infrastructure, that's one piece, right? So when we're talking about infrastructure, generally, we're talking fast, affordable, reliable internet, people having access to devices, and then the know-how to use the technology to access the resources that they need online. So I would say that in this past year, we've talked a lot about how important that infrastructure is. And while we've relied a lot on our anchor institutions, so libraries, schools, even fast food restaurants, to get the internet that we need, they're not good alternatives for that fast, reliable, affordable internet to the home. And so we know that, the federal minimum standard for 25 megabyte download, 3 upload is not enough for kids to participate in online learning, for telehealth appointments, or really to connect with family and friends. And it's definitely not enough for more than one user at a time. So what we're looking for at the City of Portland, and what I'm happy to talk about going forward, is how we as government partner with industry to figure out how to make sure that there is that fast, reliable, affordable internet to the home. And, all of those 3 elements are really important. And making sure that, as we see the future of technology, I'm talking about the needs that we have right now, but, 5G, Internet of Things, autonomous vehicles, those things are going to require more fiber, more infrastructure, and how do we continue to meet those needs? So we've got some ideas that we'll be working on in the next year and 3 to 5 years, looking at, the federal resources coming from the government and figuring out, how we partner. So really excited to be on this panel, really excited to be on with the fellow panelists, and looking forward to a good conversation. Thanks, Skip.
Great. Thanks, Elizabeth. And next we have David.
Sorry, Skip, I was on mute there. First of all, thank you for having me. Great to be on this panel with all of you. Obviously, Portland is a very important Comcast market. And I think this is a critical discussion coming out of this crisis that our country has had, and talking about how we get everyone connected to the internet. My role at the company is I'm Vice President for Regulatory Policy, and I focus on pretty much all things broadband and wireless. So Elizabeth, we can talk 5G as well, and I can try to contribute there, even though I think most people think of us as their broadband, primarily a video provider, but it is a space we're very interested in as well. The one, I think I agree with almost everything Elizabeth just said, and so I think we're gonna have a nice, robust discussion. The one thing I would like to note that sort of gets overlooked a little bit in these discussions is how well the internet actually did perform for those who have it. So there's no doubt that we need to address the adoption problem and the access problem for those who don't. But for the 80% or so of the country who have internet access, who are on this call, for example, the internet has worked incredibly well. When the crisis began over a year ago now, back in March of 2020, we went into a serious crisis mode where we were studying. We didn't know what traffic would be. Portland was one of the early cities to go to work from home and school from home. And what we had seen in the months leading up to that is in Europe, they started having traffic congestion problems. They were asked to manage the network. The governments and the regulators had asked the network to manage the network, and consumers were even asked to sort of reduce their entertainment watching during prime hours, during the peak hours. We didn't have that in this country. And I think that's largely because of the kinds of investments we've made over the past 20 years to build what we think is one of the best broadband networks in the world. So while we think, and we'll get into it a little bit, Comcast has been working very hard for over a decade on these adoption challenges, and they're multifaceted, and there are a lot of issues we're going to explore today. I just think it's important for everyone to realize that for those who had it, we've had great policies in this country that have encouraged investment and led to really what I think, saved us during this crisis. I mean, we were able to largely work from home, largely school from home, not perfect at all, but engage in commerce, engage in civic activity in a major election, all of this through the internet that everyone on this call and most other Americans had access to. So I think it's important to remember that as well as we engage in this discussion about how we ensure that everyone has access and do better than we've already done.
Thanks, David. And next up, we have Asha.
Hello, everybody. I'm Asha Keddy. I'm currently Corporate Vice President at Intel, and I am the 5G sponsor for the company. And my day job includes looking at wireless technologies, AI, and how we design the products. Intel, as you know, is more we have a horizontal play where we provide equipment and computers that power the network, the PCs, the servers. So that's where my role is. And I'd like to add, I love Oregon, moved here in 1996, and it's home, and and Intel has a large presence here, which means it's very important for us to have the local state and city thrive. In fact, our largest employee base is in Oregon, not California, even though we're headquartered there. And so it means that we engage through a variety of ways, including from water conservation all the way to how do we address the problems that Elizabeth just outlined, and go on from there.
Excellent. And last but not least, we have Jonathan.
Hey, Skip. Hey, and a big thanks for everyone for sharing time today. My name is Jonathan Neuen. I'm a field CISO at Fortinet. So I have this dream job of working with our technology and helping municipalities like Portland and cities really around the world to ensure that security, networking, and compute all work together and to deliver on that promise of a digital society, this fourth industrial revolution, to ensure that there are trusted communications and everything we do, we conduct commerce, communicate, entertain ourselves, so that no one is left behind as we move forward in this knowledge-based society, and that's all much more interconnected than ever before. So what Fortinet does is we provide cybersecurity equipment that converges networking and security through service providers like Comcast. And we work with that technology to enable services that better serve our societies and municipalities, just like Portland. So thanks for having me here. Looking forward to the discussion and my contribution with regards to cybersecurity.
Excellent. Thank you so much. So I thought it might be interesting to start with Asha, and if you could maybe comment on what impact will the combination of 5G, edge networks, and AI have on enterprises currently and in the future?
It'll have a fundamental impact. So let me just rephrase it. AI, 5G, they're all force multipliers and they're enablers. And if you all remember, when we had this phone, right? Not that long ago, we used to just use it for like Wi-Fi and download and all till 4G came along. And after the killer app for 4G that we designed was actually around video calling. But then we wanted to start using it for many areas once we were always connected. You had like the gig economy that came, Airbnb, Uber, all of these happened because there were enterprising people that actually could take advantage of this in ways the designers of it, including myself, had not envisioned. As we head towards the conglomeration of 5G, which is how do we connect everything and everyone, right? So it's moving this whole revolution towards connected objects, not just people. That's point number one. Artificial intelligence is just a fancy way of saying customization, using the data. For example, if we were all driving, our local traffic optimizations in Portland and through the tunnel may not be relevant in Boston, right? So how do we actually customize solutions to that enterprise or to that city? And edge means you just is a fancy way of saying that you have something that is stored locally. So for example, the Portland traffic doesn't need to go out of Portland, just the metadata does. But so this is fundamental, because the same revolution that we had as a person to phones, we can envision enterprises, cities having to the way they run their business, the data they need. For example, how much water do we need for the best optimal stuff so we can conserve water? How do we conserve energy in cities, route traffic? Or if I'm a microbrewery, how do I maintain the temperature? Because this is Portland after all, right? How do I maintain the temperatures of the optimal temperature things? How do I run that business more efficiently? So that's how I look at this revolutionary world.
Excellent. And if we could go to David next, in terms of broadband technology, it's capital intensive, it evolves rapidly. And I'm wondering from Comcast's perspective, what's been the company's approach to innovation in this space and how you're serving communities?
Sure. So as far as our network, we have what you call a hybrid fiber coax network. Comcast originally was a cable video provider. We laid coaxial cable across this country for one-way video that was technology developed in the 60s. About 20 years ago, the cable industry developed a new broadband technology standard called DOCSIS. And currently we're on DOCSIS version 3.1. And what we essentially have been able to do are two things. We took that one-way pipe that was pervasive around this country, and we're able to build a robust two-way communications platform. The other thing we did, of course, is replace a lot of the coax in the network with fiber. And every year we replace more and more fiber. We have projects called Fiber Deep, where the closer we can take fiber to the customer, the more capacity we have in the network. Currently today, Comcast has about 190,000 route miles of fiber across this country. We do use coax for the last mile, essentially, or a few hundred feet. And the reason we do that is really because it's cost effective, and we're able to still deliver gigabit speeds. In Portland, we offer gigabit speeds across our footprint. Actually, over 99% of our footprint across the country has gigabit speeds. And so we think this hybrid fiber coax network that we own helps us to deliver the robust speeds consumer needs in a cost-effective way. And that's how we've been able to get broadband to everyone's desktop as quickly as we have as a country over the last decade or so with these gigabit speeds.
Excellent. And so we've heard a little bit from Asha about some of the business use cases as well as government use cases that are driving sort of this new technology innovation and adoption in 5G, and then also with David a bit about some of what's been going on in broadband. And Jonathan, turning to you next, I was wondering, as different organizations are thinking about adopting any kind of cloud-based model, like what are some of the essential steps they should be taking to, essentially avoid errors
Sure.
and risk?
Yeah, so it's really funny. So much has changed, and Asha just talked about edges and the edge. When I was growing up, the edge was an Irish guitar player from Dublin, and now it's something completely different. And clouds are as wise. So it's important to remember that the cloud and cloud computing is computing. It's the processing and storage of data, and cloud gives you the ability to create choices that optimize what computing is all about. At the end of the day, you want to make sure that you understand and document what it is you're trying to achieve by migrating or adopting cloud, whether it's a private cloud or a public cloud. You need to make sure you have the same look and feel, because ultimately it's about delivering outcomes and experiences, right? It's about delivering better mission outcomes, better public services, to enable more secure, seamless communications with these digitally connected citizens. The connected citizen is really the consumer that we're focused on moving forward. At Fortinet, the way we look at it is we provide security, whether you have a private cloud, public cloud, or in the largest public multi-cloud environments in the world. We provide the same look and feel of security to help you better manage and control risk at an ROI point that really makes sense, especially for public sector and municipalities. So yeah, basic things as we think about security controls that were just as applicable 25 years ago. Those big principles apply for the cloud as well. And as we begin to move into that more detailedly, find a trusted partner, Fortinet and others. We're here to help you make that migration.
Great, thank you. And shifting to Elizabeth, so as you think about the city's various sort of tools in the toolbox, can you comment a little bit on the city's use of fiber infrastructure versus 5G and meeting community needs, or not just 5G, but also wireless in general?
Sure. So, my office, we don't build the infrastructure. We work really closely with our Bureau of Technology Services. And so they've done, I would say, a really good job of building public-private partnerships, and in fact recently entered into an agreement with Wave to build out our city fiber infrastructure. And what we do with that infrastructure that we have is that we partner with schools, government agencies, transit, health clinics, nonprofits to build the fiber and set affordable rates for providing that service. So the way we see it is it's really our ability to kind of lower costs for our partners and really serve the community. And then I would say with wireless, we're still getting there. We're still figuring that out. One thing that's really interesting, and it's a little bit off topic, but as we've introduced the idea of 5G and bringing that to Portland and this idea of being a 5G city, we've really struggled. We have heard from some very, passionate community members that they're not quite ready for that. But we haven't heard generally from the regular population. And so as we're talking about, going back into like what it means to go back into the downtown core and revitalizing downtown Portland, we're now evaluating, can 5G have a place in that? Can some of those, wireless technologies help us expand the work that we're doing into not only the downtown, but then also other parts of the city. And then the other piece that we've been thinking about and really working with a partnership on the schools is, can we use wireless technology in a place like Portland where our tree cover is excellent, but that makes it really difficult for those short waves to penetrate. And so we've been really looking at pilot projects over the next year to see how we can make that work and how we can definitely serve our low-income communities and really make sure that we can push that adoption. So we've got a couple things in the works, but I'm really excited to see where that goes.
And I'm on mute. There we go. Asha, turning to you next. So there's been a lot of sort of change and rapid development of the economy and society, which obviously in the last year has really accelerated. And during that time, there was definitely some limitations on traditional city management that became a little bit more prominent, not just city, but state, federal, et cetera. And so as urbanization gains sort of additional speed around the world, in order to cope with challenges related to population, resource, you mentioned water, the environment, many cities and countries have resorted to kind of smart cities. And so 5G networks are definitely something that, I think are an important piece to connectivity, and they've potentially a profound impact on smart cities. So I'm wondering, what are some of those impacts that you're seeing in that context, and how will it enable urban connectivity going forward?
And thanks, Skip. And I think I'd like to start by saying we should look at wireless and basically connectivity in general, right? Because it can be Wi-Fi, and some of it even starts with 4G and all, right? So with that said, some of the trends we're seeing is, and I'm going to focus on a city perspective versus all the possible things, health, education, right? For example, we could take some of the more disadvantaged schools and focus on it first, to look at how do we get them the benefits. And it's not just about getting the same benefits as we had today, but how do we have augmented learning? How do we have more visually real learning, right? So if we had some AR, VR, I could have a tour of Egypt without ever leaving the classroom, right? So the experiences that are possible with 5G that you could not get without it is the way I would focus on it. And so then how do you bring them up to speed? Another one is electricity usage, right? That's going to be big, even just this weekend, it looks like, right? And so how do we look at, and if people, whoever are fortunate enough to have ACs, turn it on? I mean, that's going to tire the grid, to put it mildly, right? So how do we look at optimizing energy savings? Most of, as we talk about 5G advanced and 6G, it's all about green energy. Does the base station need to be on? How do we signal it, right? We have reduced the cost per bit a lot with 5G, but we need to do much more. And in fact, we're working on this mission. We call it Innovative Optical Wireless Network with NTT Japan and others, where we're trying to get to 1,000th of the power usage for a higher order magnitude by 2030, right? And because otherwise we're just going to collapse on ourselves. So I think those, so the energy savings, the traffic optimizations become an important part. And a third element that we're seeing a lot in cities is around healthcare. The most expensive thing, as we all know, is the bed, right? A hospital. And we all have, most of us have beds at home, right? If we're, again, and so if you have a bed at home, how can you offload some of the costs so you can still get that care and monitoring and private precision monitoring? And I know that Jonathan was doing a lot around the security aspects of these, but how do you actually get all of these going? I think would be some of the early pools that we see.
That's great. I see people are throwing questions and comments in chat. Please continue to do so. We'll make sure we get to those a little bit later. Jonathan, I just wanted to ask, so in terms of shifting a little bit to strategies and tools, like what are some of the things that companies might be able to implement, or cities and enterprise scale organizations to identify and correct errors that they find in a cloud-based system? So you talked a little bit earlier about, here's what you need to do at the outset. What are some things they can do kind of midstream to correct for things?
So as you go through your implementation and adoption of cloud, understand the level of complexity that you're seeing there. Cloud service providers have so many tools. It's an embarrassment of riches right now. The problem is that the research community will tell you that 95% of all cloud security problems are the customer's fault because of that shared responsibility model, right? Who's responsible across platform, infrastructure, and software? Asha is absolutely correct. At the end of the day, the object of the exercise is data-driven decision-making for optimized allocation of resources, whether that's bandwidth, whether it's snow removal, whether it's the allocation and usage of utilities associated with things like tax revenue. All those things require end-to-end connectivity with very tight tolerances. She's absolutely right. The average American hospital bed has 18 different IP-enabled tools connected to it. And the idea of delivering HIPAA-compliant healthcare services over 5G with those tight tolerances for clinical and non-clinical function that spans the WAN, the LAN at the home, the WAN, the wide area network, the data center edge, and the cloud edge requires an edge-to-edge capability. So I would say that's at the heart of what you spoke to. How do you understand that you don't have a misconfigured device, a virtual instance, or a configuration? Likewise with vulnerabilities, the best way is to make sure you're using a platform. I will shamelessly say the Fortinet Security Fabric, because that's why I came to Fortinet, but you need something that has a common denominator that gives you the look and feel of what you have, whether it's in your own data center or any cloud in the environment. That's how you ensure that you get over the misconfiguration issues that will plague you because of complexity. So yes, what we do is we manage complexity so that it is underneath the surface. It's a seamless interaction. At the end of the day, that's how you deliver those better outcomes for these connected citizens. Just one last note, we're all millennials. I am somewhere above 50, but I have millennial expectations that with every interaction with any brand, any organization, it's gonna be a wow experience for me, right? And so we need to do all those things, make it secure, keep it private, and make sure that we're operating with those 5 nines of availability that David over at Comcast can certainly speak to, right?
For sure, for sure. And that's a great segue too. So thinking a little bit about David, and let's shift a little bit to partnerships, right? So you talked a lot about some of the programmatic, or at least you alluded to some of the programmatic work that Comcast has been doing for over a decade. And I'm wondering if you could talk a little bit about some of the programs that you're doing that address the digital divide, and how those partnerships are structured.
Sure, thank you, Skip. Great opportunity to talk about this. We at Comcast recognize the importance of the internet probably before most. Everything we're talking about today, the innovations that Asha is talking about, we invested because we anticipated them. And we understood quickly how important it was going to be, not just for business purposes, but for our society. And getting everyone connected is something we've been talking about for a very long time. I know Elizabeth probably has heard our messaging on this for a long time from Marion and others in our Portland community. At Comcast 10 years ago, we launched a program called Internet Essentials, where we offer to low-income students access to the internet for $9.95. Over the last decade, we have expanded access. So it started as a low-income student program, and it's essentially now available to elderly, veterans, and really anyone now. We're not limited to just low-income students. We used to be on the school lunch program. Now it's anyone who's low income. And over the last decade, that price has risen remains at $9.95. So for 10 years, and at the same time, we've increased the speed. Elizabeth mentioned the need for faster broadband speeds as consumers are at home and students are studying from home. We have raised the speed for our Internet Essentials product to 50 megabits down and 5 megabits up per second. We did that during the pandemic, and we've kept the price at $9.95. In order for that program to succeed, when we started, we reached out to local school communities. So we were working with school boards and schools to advertise the program. Just launching the program isn't enough, of course. And I don't mean to take Elizabeth's thunder here, but I'm sure she'll understand. Getting people to sign up for the internet, even at $9.95, is a very challenging thing to do. Price is just one barrier. There are issues of digital literacy. There's issues of hardware, access to hardware. So we've incorporated that in our program as well. You can't just sell it at a lower price. You've got to reach the consumers. You've got to provide them with subsidized hardware if they can't afford it, and with digital education. So in the last 10 years, nationwide, we've signed up 10 million people to the Internet Essentials program. During COVID, we took extra steps, of course, because the criticality of this couldn't have been any more urgent. We waived the fees for 60 days. So we gave 60 days to get people on, to the extent $9.95 was considered a barrier. We actually think most of the people who don't take it, it's not about the $9.95. There are other reasons than price that they're not taking it. But we waived the fees, and that helps. We also, as I mentioned, we increased the speed. Another thing we did that was new, our program was mostly between us and the consumer and reaching out to millions of consumers. We adopted a program as local communities were getting funding, state and federal funding. We adopted a program where we were working with the school boards and with communities and organizations that goes a bit so that we would be almost the partnership. We took the partnership to another level where the relationship was not with the customer, but with the local officials who had resources to add into this, to get more people to join on. So for us, this is a situation we've been talking about for a long time and something we think is very important. Other ISPs have joined in the last couple of years. And of course, all of this, the importance of this has just been made more acute with the crisis. One other thing I'd like to say, Skip, before I hand over the mic, I'm in DC, so I filibuster sometimes a little bit. But the last point, of course, it's not just an adoption issue of where it's available, but one of the commenters noted here, we do have a rural problem. There are parts of this country that don't have access to broadband, and that's also unacceptable. And to the extent we were able to gloss over it before the pandemic, it's not something we can ignore anymore. And I know Congress would like to allocate billions of dollars, and they've already allocated billions of dollars to Oregon and all 50 states to try to address that problem as well. So it's really a two-tier problem of adoption when it's available and access when it's not available. And we need to work on both of those.
That's a great point. And I'd definitely like to return to the conversation around rural a little bit later today as well in this discussion. And shifting to Elizabeth next, as you think about some of the various types of next generation technologies that are being kind of rolled out and implemented, what are some of the things the city thinks about when you think about things like cost and access? David alluded to trying to reduce price through some programs and also providing technical services and that kind of stuff. What are some of the things the city typically thinks about when trying to overcome some of these barriers to greater adoption and use of the latest technologies?
Sure. So first, I'd like to, thank David for his comments and also mention that, Comcast has also partnered with the city for Portland Parks and Rec on lift zones, which have been incredibly helpful in our community. Also want to thank a lot of our local providers for participating in the emergency broadband benefit, which for eligible households provides $50 a month for internet. As long as those funds are there. And so in the short term, I would say that, we really see ourselves as a connector. While we, would love to partner with all our telecoms, we have also helped in putting some of our companies in touch with some of our local nonprofits to make some direct investments in community. So that's a piece that we really encourage. Again, the reason that we see ourselves more as a connector is because for the populations that we're trying to serve, they're not always trusting of government, but they are trusting of the people that they know. And so being able to make those connections makes it a lot easier. I'll also say that in the pandemic, through the CARES funding and then the upcoming American Rescue Plan Act funding, providing just the things that people need. So providing those devices, providing internet assistance, and providing that training through our local nonprofits, through those people who are doing that frontline engagement work, that's where we really excelled. And so we plan to do it again with ARPA. So we're in the process of figuring out, the total amount that we get to use, partnering and pairing that with the emergency broadband benefit. So in the short term, while we can't meet the needs of every person that is, still facing barriers, we are able to use the federal assistance that's coming our way to make that direct impact, to give people the devices to make sure that they have the access to internet, and also getting training from a trusted source. We know that, those are the three pieces of adoption. Going forward, We're really looking at, well, I'll tell you in the next couple of months, I get to hire a broadband planner, which is the first for my bureau. And it's really going to be a person that understands that technical piece, but can also help us apply for grants and help us partner with some of our local providers to figure out a more long-term solution. So those are a couple of things that we're working on in the present and then future planning.
Hey, Elizabeth, is that job in Portland?
It is in Portland.
I'm, much nicer in DC, that's for sure.
Now that's an interesting development on this panel. Wanted to shift to Asha, you did a really, I think, excellent job kind of laying out some exciting both current and future use cases for newer technology. And I'm wondering what impacts might some of these future use cases have for social justice and equity?
So Skip, I think we think about it, right, it has to be baked in when we think about the use cases. When we, a lot of what we talk about, even when we talk about rural or low-income neighborhoods and cities, it's all about policies and how we actually deploy these. So there's two aspects to it. One, and I'll get to both. And I'd like to say, a hammer, we can use it to build things, but we can also use it for destructive things, right? And that's actually why Jonathan is there with security, right? It's wonderful, and it can be misused too, right? So with that said, I think when we talk about responsibility and all, there's two aspects to it. The first is the technology. Is the technology helping? Like I explained, we're lowering the cost per bit. We have to make it where we don't have to use as much energy. We have different use cases. For example, we have to make it like harder to understand. So we have acronyms, but we want to make it like where for massive machine type communications or sensors, we have 10 years of battery life, low bandwidth, and then there are things that are more mission critical or disaster recovery that we just can't have the networks fail. So how do you have these use cases, but also make it where we're using less energy, different kinds? How can we use renewables and solar energy? The second, and so this is actually a pretty international commitment in the standard setting. And it even goes down to the level of the words we use. We have shifted our terminology to primary and secondary, or like a lot of people, so that it's more inclusive in terms of how we write the specs and all. So that's the engineering aspect, and it's seen at an international level. Then there's also the policy aspects that I mentioned, but it's also the corporate responsibility. I'll give you an example with Intel. At Intel, we have this thing called RISE, which is responsible, including going all the way to our supply chain and who our supply chain, and it deals with everything, not just technology, but is there, bad things you can do to human beings on the way, right? So inclusiveness, which is, we all know about how important inclusiveness is of different geos, of different ethnicities, of different backgrounds. And then sustainability, that's the S, right, in all of it. For example, we're doing a lot of work around Oregon, so towards a net positive water usage, including like renewable energy, things like that. And the last is E, which is enabling all of these. So I do think corporations have a purpose and a huge calling here. And of course the communities too, which comes up through the policies and all of it. So that's it in a nutshell. And so we're designing for a lot of these use cases because we have a beautiful planet. And if you look at 6G, a lot of the use cases really are around how do we actually take care of this? And it's not something that you'd go to an IEEE or a geeky conference and have so much energy as a vector, like green energy, right? So
that's great. And Jonathan, Asha mentioned the importance of security, and so as we think about more people being online, more people interacting with technology, especially over the course of the last year, what are some recommendations that you might give for folks who are looking to develop a security and risk management strategy? And do you see any sort of distinctions between sort of people in companies with lots of resources versus small, or are there some things that are pretty standard across size?
Cybercrime happens for all crimes, it pays. And you will find victimizations amongst the largest organizations with the deepest benches and a large number of cybersecurity experts on an equal basis as organizations with no security presence. It is cybercrime and the disruptions associated are a direct manifestation of just how interconnected we are. And what it also shows you is that irrespective of the level of funding and resources you may have, unless you take some fundamental steps and learn the hard way like I did across 25 years, you could easily fall victim as well. So we start off with the idea that computing, the data being processed and stored, should not be disaggregated from your thoughts about the networking or the security component. All three elements have to work together to create these end-to-end solutions. And computing is highly distributed today. It's in your home office, it's in a retail office, it's on a connected vehicle, a trash truck, school bus, etc. It's connected to smart infrastructure. It's in our traditional enterprise environments, and it's in public clouds all over the place. So computing is highly distributed. And so networking and security need be as well. So the first step is understand your current state. First, do no harm. Understand where your data is located, who owns it, the type of data, its criticality, the underlying types of dependencies, and what your goal is. What is your risk management goal? Start with goals, then go back to strategy, strategy to plans, plans to technology. I'm an anomaly in the vendor space. So I will tell you, buy no product until you fully understand what it is you're trying to achieve. Once you do that, then give me a call. I'll be happy to help you. But those basic strategies, and understand that it's all interconnected. So as you go through there, look at a holistic approach. Do not look at computing alone, networking alone, security alone. That's why you see things like secure SD-WAN, the integration of networking in SD-WAN with security that connects you to a cloud. All three elements are highly adaptable, highly scalable, highly elastic. But if they aren't working together, what you get are really high-speed optimized bottlenecks, right? Which really begins to falter. Finally, I would add this. At Fortinet, we offer something called the Network Security Experts Academy at no charge to the public. So NSE 1 and 2 are basic security awareness training that everyone should take advantage of, right? My kids who are sub 10 years old all take those courses, right? Because we're all connected digital citizens, and we should all be enabled with a certain level of literacy with regards to the internet. The internet is a wild place out there. And so you need to be prepared as you venture into that, whether you're an individual, organization, or municipality. But yeah, basic risk management strategies. Think of the whole picture, think about how everything works together, and look at fundamentals. The Center for Internet Security 20 controls are a good place to start. Likewise, the agencies in the federal government, also Fortinet.
That's really great advice. And one comment that came up earlier was just the focus around, equity is not just an urban problem, it's also rural. And so shifting a little bit to that topic, I think it was Ben who posted that in the chat. I want to return there for a minute, and Asha in particular, what do you see as 5G connectivity looking like in rural communities that have limited infrastructure to support that type of technology?
A few things on that. First of all, one of the things that I hope we see in the US with rural communities is to jump technologies, right? Or to just so that you don't have to go through all the variations and the backwards things that we have to do. So that's number one. Number two, I think this has a lot of bipartisan support, which is good, and this has been and there's been a lot of policy, and starting from the last several years, I wanted to say, but it's really taking extra energy in the pandemic, and even right now. And my last trip actually was March 4th to the US Senate on secure supply chain. Actually, that was my last year. That was my last physical trip. I came back and we got all of it. Everybody knows the importance, and there's some real energy towards it. Now, going back to the use cases, right? It becomes important to look at things like the things we're seeing are the basic ones around education, healthcare, and how do you connect hospitals and all, where it's important to get them coverage on the basic areas. But the more important things we're also seeing them is how do they live their lives better? Agriculture is a big one, right? How do we actually look at we're doing this open innovation lab with with T-Mobile and others, where we're looking at water usage. I keep saying water usage because, most of the Western US is in some kind of extreme drought, right? So the water usage ones become really, really critical, as in big example. Another ones is like, cattle, livelihoods, other things that are important. And you have to think, when you think about rural, I think about coverage, right? I think about low data rates. I think about coverage with certain areas that have more capacity, right? And so it's really a different problem to solve. What has happened is up until 4G, we solved everything for me as a consumer, right? And it's all about me and what I can do. But here we have to actually change the thinking, and policy is very important to solve it for a region or for particular use cases.
Excellent. David, wanted to ask you a question, which is, as we think about some of the various barriers to greater adoption or sort of expansion of digital infrastructure, what are some of the policies that could be helpful in incentivizing more adoption? You mentioned rural and some of the federal funding and programs that are coming out as one area, but where do you see the policy innovation occurring here that's going to help to address some of these issues around digital divide?
Right. So first we have to identify the problem and then see what the solutions might work. On the rural broadband problem, the problem is somewhat clear. There's not an economic business case that justifies the expansion of the facilities into those areas. It's too expensive to build out. 5G has the potential with some of the other bands, not the higher bands that Elizabeth noted have issues with trees and things, but the lower band stuff maybe has the potential to allow for the leapfrog Asha's talking about, so we can get some fast broadband out to consumers. There's some debate going on among policy circles as to whether or not that's going to be good enough. We have, for example, you're probably familiar with the Starlink network that Elon Musk has helped fund and through SpaceX, that delivers, pretty impressive broadband speeds, 100 megabits down, and it can get it very cost effectively to all parts of this country. But there's some debate about whether or not that's good enough. We obviously don't want to create rural we already have a rural urban divide on broadband, but we don't want to create something where they get sort of second class broadband. But on the other hand, I think some of those capabilities are pretty impressive. 100 megabits per second service, sometimes even faster. I think they advertise much faster. So the policy challenge is, how do we solve the economic barriers? You could do it through some technologies like wireless and satellite, which may not deliver the capabilities that you're going to get from a cable network or a fully fiber network. So is that good enough, depending on the cost benefit analysis? And then the other barrier, and then you say, well, what are the other policy choices? Well, right before the pandemic, the FCC held something called a reverse auction. And it was an interesting way to bring broadband to some of our most rural areas, where the government said, we will pay you to build broadband, which they've been doing for about 75 years. And not just broadband, of course, telephone originally. And whoever can do it for less expensive, but yet deliver, it was a formula between cost and speed and capabilities, they would provide a federal subsidy. And the question is, we have subsidies in this system that have, like I said, going back 75 years, but they're still not always focused on the right things. We are still subsidizing telephone companies to provide voice service under the Communications Act, which was passed about 25 years ago. And because of the statute, it can be changed. So we've got these policy challenges. We've got these legal barriers that it takes a lot to rewrite the rules. You have certain companies that are entrenched in the old system of subsidies. And what we really need to do is shake it up. We have to address the economic barriers and the policy barriers. We have to change some of these subsidies. I think the FCC took a first step with this creative reverse auction subsidies for broadband. And then I do think we're going to, at some point, we're going to have to make a cost benefit analysis and say, for some parts of this country, maybe a satellite system that's a good one, maybe not as good as fiber to the home, but a really good one might have to be good enough. And I know that's not a popular thing to say. And with so many billions of dollars flowing, it doesn't feel like you have to make those decisions right now, but we probably will at some point. And fortunately, we have technologies. There will be wireless and sets that could help reach that last 1 or 2%. But fundamentally, we've got to look at this. We've got to commit to it with real money. We probably have to stop funding old voice services and really commit to broadband networks and just say this is a key national priority, which I think is going on at the federal level between the ARPA funds that were discussed earlier and the infrastructure bill, which this afternoon it looks like maybe an agreement was reached between Congress and the president. That's going to have another 40-50 billion dollars for broadband. So we're going to see, I think, in the next 5 years, a tremendous amount of investment in both of these areas, talk about rural and adoption challenges.
No, that's really well said. I think that's a complex area, and I think you did a good job kind of breaking down sort of some of the various levers that folks have available to them and what are going to be the drivers policy-wise. If we shift to Elizabeth now, Elizabeth, in terms of the city's approach to looking at next generation technologies like 5G or whatever comes next, what are you looking at areas where that technology maybe isn't sort of ready or appropriate, or there's a lack of infrastructure? Like how do you look at where technologies meet needs and where they don't, and how are you addressing the gaps?
Yeah, and that's a really good question. So, basically, we are very focused right now on meeting the needs of those who currently have barriers to adoption, right? And that's where our focus has been. But I think, again, we're staffing up, we're looking towards the future. We're really figuring out, okay, those are the basic needs, right? Making sure that folks have access to internet. But what does that mean going forward? And again, like I said before, it's really that partnership with our frontline communities, with the nonprofits that are serving folks, to get a sense of what do folks want and what do folks need. I look a lot at the 5G, and even if we become a 5G city, that's great for, as David said, 80% of us maybe. But then that just creates a further digital divide for those who already don't have access. And so our focus is really making sure that people have the education that they need to understand kind of what they need, the education that they need to also be able to use the technology, because we're still working with folks who don't know how to start an email, don't know how to log on to their computer, things like that. And so what we're really looking at is the various levels, right? So there's the very basic, like how do we get folks just at a minimal level? But then going back to what Jonathan was saying, how do we get folks very tuned into their cybersecurity issues? Because the more that we get folks online and they're not prepared, that's when we face problems there too. And people are at risk of giving away their important information or losing lots of money because they're giving it away to somebody. So we're really looking at just the levels, right? And then that last level is making sure that we've got more people of color, we've got more people with disabilities, we've got more folks just in the tech sector, so that we are catering to folks at the very beginning. We've got people in the room making those decisions. So I think there's a lot of levels that we need to be working on that are going to get all of our residents, and particularly our residents of color, our residents with different abilities, our residents who are low income, ready for that next wave. And back to Asha's point, it's that being able to jump over, not just constantly catching them up, but getting them exactly where we need to be. So we have a lot of work to do, but I'm really excited to get to do it, and really hoping that with our partnerships with the companies and the nonprofits in Portland, we're going to make some headway for sure.
Excellent. And Jonathan, it looks like you've got the ability to kind of take us home.
Okay.
And I'm wondering if if we'll leave it with the cybersecurity guy to say something positive or optimistic about sort of the.
I am inherently an optimist, right? And I think we're on the cusp of major transformational changes. Technology and this infrastructure is going to reduce a lot of systemic inequities in the way we conduct commerce, communicate, entertain ourselves. The mass adoption of hybrid remote working really flattens the economy, right? So rural areas that were not in play a long time ago, suddenly now are going to be in high demand. The way we approach it from Fortinet from a cybersecurity perspective is that we deliver trusted communications, whether you're on the rural edge, enterprise edge, data centers across our society, right? LAN, WAN, data center, cloud edges, employing zero trust principles so that only the right users and the right entities will access the right applications. And when you do that and you marry that with 5G, mind you, 5G is an ecosystem. That's only the wireless portion. There's still a huge amount of broadband, dark fiber, heaven forbid, all types of connectivity that need to be working together in unison, right? But I'm an optimist. I fully believe that what we're seeing today is just on the cusp of changes in how we think about work. Is not something we commute to and from. It's just something we do, right? And I think going forward, technology is going to flatten a lot of the problems we've had in the past. And at Fortinet, I have a dream job of working with a lot of these companies that are on this panel today to get cybersecurity right, because security is the basis of how we move forward. It has to be trusted communication. So a big thanks for allowing me to be on this panel. I hope I didn't take up too much oxygen. Thanks.
No, it was wonderful to have all of you on. So David, Asha, Jonathan, and Elizabeth, again, thank you for taking some time out of your very busy schedules. We really appreciate it. And thank you as well to all of our folks who joined us live, and to all those who will be watching this in the recorded version in the coming weeks. And so thank you, everyone. And also a big shout out to Riley O'Brien on my team, who's our events and experiences lead. She has been very busy the last several months preparing for all the various sessions this week. And so we really appreciate her. Well done. So with that, one final shout out again to all of the supporters for the Techlandia Summit. We really appreciate all of the time and effort you've put into this. We couldn't have done it without you. So thanks again. Have a great day, everyone.
Thank you. And thanks for having us here.
Thank you.
We love Portland.
Yes.
And Oregon.
Excellent. Thank you.